GM everyone, and welcome back to another interview here on Coin Bureau. Now, today we've got a very special guest on. It's Mr. Richard Teng, the CEO of the largest crypto exchange in the world. I'm, of course, talking about Binance. So, Richard, a very warm welcome to the Coin Bureau.
Hi, thanks, Nick, for having me. GM everyone, it's great to be here.
Cool, Richard. So we've got a lot of exciting things to talk about today, but I think let's start with the most pressing news right now, more particularly as it relates to Binance. And this is the news that we got, I think, last week after the SEC dropped its lawsuit against Binance. So I have two questions in relation to that. One is, how important was this decision for you guys? And how will it impact your strategy? And then what's the very first operational change you guys will make after this?
Well, I think, first of all, just let me thank Chairman Paul Atkins, President Trump and his administration for taking a very thoughtful, considered approach in terms of crypto rule formulation, right? Choosing to go down the path of supporting innovation instead of stifling innovation, and choosing, very considered approach in terms of crypto rule formulation instead of going down the path of regulation via enforcement. As an ex-regulator, I can tell you that's the worst form of regulation that is, right? So this is a big win. The dismissal of the suit by SEC against Binance is a big win not only for the company, Binance, but for the industry as a whole. It demonstrates that the willingness of US being the largest capital market, the largest economy around the world, to really continue to drive and support innovation. So it's a big positive news. It puts US firmly back into the driving seat to really become the crypto hub of the world. For us, again, it is a big win as well. I mean, as we continue to expand globally, we always keep our options open. I mean, we are keeping watch very closely of what's coming out from the US in terms of rules and regulations, and holding a watching brief to determine what's our next step.
Okay, coming to that, mention regions and areas, obviously the SEC being US-based. I'm curious what this means for your US market aspirations then. Is that still a goal? And what steps are you guys taking on that front, particularly as it relates to Binance US?
I mean, Binance.com doesn't have any US customers. We don't serve the US at this point in time. But US obviously is a very big, important market. We want to do whatever we can, given President Trump's ambition to make US a crypto capital of the world. And we being the largest ecosystem in the crypto space, we have plenty to add and plenty that we can do to support. So we are doing a very close watching brief on what we can do. At this point in time, there's no immediate plans that we can announce in terms of our deployment.
Got it. Okay. So you mentioned there, of course, that the pro-crypto SEC, Paul Atkins, thanking him emphatically for this. And you guys indeed aren't the only crypto company that's had lawsuits dropped. There's been many, including Coinbase and a few others. So I'm curious, obviously, we see all the headlines that are going on in the crypto news, but from Binance's deliberations with the agency, and indeed most agencies in the US, do you think that there has been a genuine tactical reset from the agencies?
Well, I think it's a sea change, right, compared to the past administration. I mean, for all of us that have lived through the year 2020 to 2024, you know that in the US is going through Operation Choke Point 2.0. The crypto industry, by and large, has been under unfair scrutiny and unfair pressure. And in many cases, people term it as unfair prosecution. So we are glad that that era has passed. I think this era is very, very different. It's very supportive of crypto innovation. And US is at the forefront of really utilizing AI as well as crypto, which are the key technologies to support all the different type of industries to grow into the future. And because of the move by the US, every other big country and countries around the world that are very interested in terms of their own, how to attract foreign direct investments, how do you do economic development locally, are forced to take a step, looking at both of this technology very closely, how they do it deploy. US starting to have strategic reserve in crypto makes all the rest sit up as well and notice to say, hey, look, this is a critical and important asset class. So we are actually helping a few countries that are wanting to set up their own strategic reserve in crypto as well on that front. So we are advising countries around the world, both on rule formulation on the one hand, given what's coming out from the US. So there's a big win, not only for us, but for the world, because you're going to have much greater clarity in terms of rule formulation to support crypto. but also governments around the world are starting to embrace crypto in terms of their own strategic reserves.
Okay, yeah, we'll get onto those in a bit. I just want to come back to this question around rule formulation, and this is particularly relevant for something you have experience in, given an ex-regulator. In terms of US regulation, more specifically, something that many people are now focused on in terms of clear rules of the road is the market structure bill as one of them. But I'm curious from your perspective then, as an exchange operator and as an ex-regulator, which single rule change would give the industry the predictability it keeps asking for, specifically as it relates to the US regulatory agencies?
I think, as with all rule formulation, is a journey, right? So we are the most regulated exchange globally now. We are regulated in more than 21 different countries. And it's a journey. I mean, even in the 21 different countries that we're regulated in, they're at different stage of rule formulation, and we help them with that. I think US will go through that as well to give much more greater clarity on the different type of financial instruments, how they construed, where do they fall under the purview of which agency. Firstly, of course, they are coming out with stable coins. I think that will be given much greater clarity. Then on the different type of tokens, be it security, commodity, digital asset token, they have quite different characteristics. So I think they'll go through that approach of giving clarity on the different type of characteristics that will fall under the different sort of rule books and under different agencies, right? So we are eagerly awaiting all those clarity coming through from the US. But as of today, only 1/3 of global regulators are regulating this space. And I think all this development globally are forcing the rest of the 2/3 to take a much more proactive approach in terms of considering coming out with clear rules to support the industry.
Yeah, indeed. And I think when you say one regulatory agency in government, I assume, are you referring to the UAE in terms of VARA, or because, and this has come back to the global regulations, and we are both based here in the UAE, and you obviously have expertise in this because you used to work, as I believe, with ADGM, and then before that MAS in Singapore. So speaking more locally to the local market and the local regulators, what has the UAE gotten right that other countries and regions could potentially emulate?
I think very importantly, UAE has always been at the forefront of supporting innovation, right? The willingness to understand and embrace new innovation, I think, is key. So if you look at UAE itself, it's not only on the blockchain technology, it's things like AI, quantum computing that's coming through, etc. UAE is always at the forefront of rethinking the future, how that future will be, and how will UAE be strategic to become a strategic hub in all those things, right? Which is why it is very early in terms of embracing all this innovation and technology, and also embracing what form of rules and regulations that's needed to give clarity to support all the growth of this different industry, right? So you mentioned I was in ADGM. I was the CEO of Financial Services Regulatory Authority there. And way back in 2017, 2018, when I was there, we developed one of the most comprehensive framework in the world to start regulating crypto, way ahead of many other jurisdictions, including all the G7 countries. Because I realized at that point in time that I got to know crypto in 2017, right, in the US. And the more I deep dive into this industry then, and crypto adoption was less than 1% then, the more I am convinced that this is going to be the future of financial services, because it solves so many problems that me at that point in time, being involved in financial industry for 20 over years, we have not solved a lot of financial inclusion even until today, right? So crypto exists only because it solves problems, and I can see how it changes the life of so many people around the world. And it's a superior technology compared to what we have currently in the financial space. So we came up with a framework, one of the first in the world, gained a lot of traction, and then subsequently, as you mentioned, other parts of the Middle East region. I mean, credit to Central Bank of Bahrain that came out with their own framework as well, and then subsequently the establishment of VARA on that front in UAE to start regulating the crypto industry. So all this really embraces innovation in a responsible fashion and allow the sector to grow, right? So if you look at UAE now, it's a very vibrant economy, not only on the blockchain front, but on the AI front as well, right? The who's and the very important financial global entity around the world are all building in the UAE.
Indeed. So you would say then the most important takeaway from there is engagement with the industry, not spurning any sort of new technology, but just engaging with them And that's what something you guys did earlier in terms of your frameworks at ADGM. Is it like engagement and come in and talk to, unlike the SEC, come in and talk to us, you actually listen to people?
Come and talk to us. We need to understand. We work together to come up with rules that are sensible. There's pro-market, but manage risk at the same time. So those are the best form of rules, what we call smart regulation. If you have rules that only address the risk aspect of it, there's a tendency that you ignore the growth aspect, and those are not good rules, because you have to understand rules are meant to really support the growth of industry in a responsible fashion. If you don't do that, then that rule is too stringent, is too one-dimensional, and it doesn't serve its purpose.
Got it. So let's move on now. I'll speak more specifically about Binance and go off the regulation point, but let's talk more about a very important milestone for Binance more recently, and that was crossing 275 million registered accounts. That's pretty eye-popping. And now to put that into perspective, guys, that's approaching Netflix in terms of users. So I guess, Richard, what were some of the two biggest drivers of this jump in user growth?
Well, so first of all, just let me thank all our users out there, people that trust and place their confidence in us. I think this journey is only possible because of your support and confidence, and we are deeply grateful for everything that you have done for us, right? And we are here to support you and build the best platform to support all your needs, right? So on the user number, Nick, we started last year in 2024 with 170 million users. By now, as you mentioned, we have crossed 275 million users. So we have added more than 100 million users in less than a year and a half. That's the fastest growth in the history of the company. You say we are near to Netflix. That's true. But to give you another figure in another fashion, right? So on a daily basis, it means that we have more than 150,000 new users coming on board globally on the daily basis. So that's mind-popping. And the growth trajectory is very fast, both on the institutional side as well as the retail side. When I became the CEO in late 2023, I said that, look, for me, my key focus are three aspects, right? So the first aspect is to continue to build the best platform that's possible out there to serve users in terms of their needs. And we always put users at the center and front of every key decision that we make on that front, right? So in terms of user security, which is extremely important, safety of assets, which is extremely important, data encryption, having the best product features, which we continue to innovate and experiment with new things. And we have very passionate users that continue to give us very useful inputs on that front. I think the recent introduction of Binance Alpha that has really become very, very popular, again, is another showcase of how we continue to innovate to really support users to the best of our ability. Secondly, given the direction of travel is very clear, one of compliance. We have invested very heavily into compliance. Today, our compliance headcount exceeds more than 1,400 people, and that's close to 25% of our total staff strength in the company, which is huge by any measure. And we are now regulated in more than 21 different countries around the world, making us the most regulated exchange. And we will continue to deploy and support our users wherever they are. And thirdly, we will continue to form global partnership. We are still at a very early stage of adoption, 7-8%. And for any technology that reached this level of adoption, the next 10% will come very quickly. But for us to continue to grow, we want the industry and ecosystem to continue to become much more sophisticated. So we continue to work with partners all around the world to really support and embrace crypto. I mean, on that front, let me congratulate Circle that was listed yesterday. They are one of our partner firms, and you can see the huge appetite for anything crypto, right? So we're very glad with the huge, overwhelming market response to that. So we'll continue to focus on building the best and the most vibrant ecosystem out there to really support this community.
When Binance IPO?
Well, I mean, you see the strategic investment by MGX, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, we have no need for funding, but I think those deliberation has to be decided by the board and shareholders over time.
Exactly, got it. Coming back to some of these numbers that you cited and the regions you've grown and everything, I'm curious, which regions geographically are you more bullish on? And are there any surprise pockets of growth, say country or demographic, that you guys didn't see coming?
No, so if you look at globally, we see many different bright spots, right? And the different regions are really moving in the same direction, I would say. Some are much faster, some slowest trajectory, but still we have seen stronger pickup compared to the past, right? So Asia Pacific, many different parts of Asia Pacific. I mean, we are licensed in many parts of Asia Pacific today, like Japan, Thailand, Indonesia, and that list goes on. And we see strong growth in many different parts of Asia Pacific, and those are still driving huge growth globally. Latin America is another area of very fast growth. Middle East, North Africa region. I mean, we have licensed entity in all the 3 places that are regulating crypto now: Abu Dhabi, Dubai, Bahrain, and we see strong take up and growth in all these areas. So we see bright spots all around the world actually on that front. And with governments coming in, and can see pronouncements. Now elections a lot of times are won on whether a candidate is being pro-crypto or otherwise. Again, I think that gave a different dimension and narrative to crypto. So all these are big positive. The institutions coming through as well. Last year has been our best year in terms of onboarding new institutions. The number has been quite mind-boggling, more or less double in terms of new institutions that's onboarded last year compared to previous year. And I mean, the largest asset manager in the world, BlackRock CEO Larry Finn, when he said that all institutions, foundations, etc., should start doing at least 2% allocation of their assets into crypto, that speaks volume. And we're seeing those allocations coming true. A lot of institutions are now onboarded on our platform and start allocating to crypto. So the drivers are pretty strong.
Yeah. So just coming back to some of those more specific zoning on specific regions, I think one thing that doesn't often come across the crypto news cycle is the wide-scale adoption of crypto in emerging markets, some of which you've mentioned, for actual commerce. So I know Binance is intimately involved in that with countries specifically in Africa. So can you expand a bit more on some of those initiatives you guys have been involved in?
So we have announced quite a number, right? So if you look at the latest announcement we have made, is with the Kingdom of Bhutan, and that's on Binance Pay. So if you are going to visit the beautiful Kingdom of Bhutan today, you can use Binance Pay for everything, for your visa, for your hotels, for your meals, for buying from local vendors, etc., etc. And that's an initiative by the Ministry of Tourism in Bhutan. We work with a local partner bank there to bring this about. But we have many of these initiatives. And you're absolutely right. In many parts of frontier market, especially, and developing market, where financial inclusion is very low, less than 20%, meaning 80% of the people have no access to the traditional financial system or the payment system. They can't do local payment. They don't have a bank account. The banks refuse to onboard them. If they want to do remittance to their loved ones or accept remittance from overseas from their loved ones working overseas, it's very costly. Many of these remittance houses charge north of 10%, and it takes 2 to 3 days to reach their loved ones, right? So, but if you use crypto, it's at a margin fraction of the fees. We on Binance Pay, we charge very marginal rate on that front. And we calculated, after we introduced Binance Pay over the last 2 years, about 27 billion have been, transferred. And if you look at compared to traditional remittance house average rate of more than 7%, users save more than 1.75 billion using Binance Pay. So all these products are getting increasingly popular. It becomes the only means for many parts of the world in terms of domestic payments, in terms of store of value. People holding on, you agree with me, people holding on to stable coins or to Bitcoin has done very well in the last 4 to 5 years compared to a lot of domestic fiat currency that has depreciated hugely because of hyperinflationary situation. So we see crypto in action, and I mentioned crypto solve problems. And it's not only in these parts of the world. If you look at financial institutions, they are now getting it, right? So if you look at the financial architecture of banking, you do a remittance, it takes 2 to 3 days to reach the recipient, huge cost. Now they discover the beauty of crypto via stablecoin, and many of them are building their stablecoin real on this front to really support users in a different way. So we are seeing crypto in action, and it's a very bright future.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And you mentioned there Binance Pay. So obviously, as one of your products that's seen a lot of growth, I'm curious, are there any other particular products or services more specifically that you've seen driving most of the growth and interest in Binance over the past year?
Well, we have seen, some of the key themes that we're seeing is this, right? Firstly, Bitcoin as a macro asset play, right? So if you look at increasingly in a world where, there are tariff conversation, possible trade wars, Bitcoin become debt neutral currency. It's not subject to discussion on debt ceiling. It cannot be weaponized for trade wars, etc. So you can see a lot of institutions now starting to prefer debt as an asset class compared to many of the other currencies. So indeed, if you look at the performance of Bitcoin since the beginning of 2024 till now, is the best performing asset class. Since the US election against from 2024 to now, against gold, against NASDAQ, against S&P 500, you can see the performance, and you track different time points, right? From then to the US election to Liberation Day, Bitcoin has been the best performing asset class, taking different time period or duration. And I think that theme of Bitcoin as a macro asset is coming true in a big fashion. So I think that's one. Secondly, stablecoin. Right? You can see the usage going up very quickly. And on that front, based on research by CryptoQuant, 60% of Binance holds 60% of stablecoin assets of centralized exchange, right? So again, that highlight, the security that we're put in place on our platform, putting users' interest at the forefront and users' trust in us. So we're very grateful on that front. So that has come through as a different team. But we continue to see all these different teams developing. And all these are exciting. And we look forward to really supporting all these different utility use cases coming through, be it in terms of payments, cards, stable coins, etc., etc. And we have, as I mentioned, we have very passionate users. Everywhere we go to, there are different ideas of how we can really support them. And we would really want to roll out as many features as possible, subject to local rules and regulations.
Yeah, speaking of one of those features that you mentioned prior in the beginning of the interview, and this is Binance Alpha. And now this is obviously a opportunity for Binance users to get potential opportunities with new projects, but also potentially more risk, right? Because it's lower risk, higher risk, higher reward, but also new projects generally tend to have risk with them. So my question is more specifically, how do you balance the buzz of, obviously you guys have pre-vetted some of these projects coming onto Binance Alpha with, this proper due diligence, and what sort of steps and protocols have you put in place to make sure that, the Binance Alpha users are getting the best quality early stage projects to potentially invest in?
It's always a delicate balance, I would say, right? And we always are trying to find that best point in terms of that delicate balance. On the one hand, we do, scrutiny of the projects, especially when it comes to a listing on spot, etc., etc. And, the criteria we've published them, we look at, track record, the technology behind it, if there's utility, who are the teams building it, the security features, compliance, and that list goes on, right? How the community engagements are, etc. But at the same time, we have to balance that with allowing user earlier and greater access to new projects, right? Which is where Binance Alpha come into play. So for some of these exciting new projects that we think, have good potential, we are engaged, the tokens and see whether we can bring it to our users and give our users, that privilege to partake in very exciting growth going forward. So it is trying to find a right balance, and we're always trying to see where is in that pendulum for the different, there are different type of listings now, as you know, on Binance, right? So there's futures, spot. Now we rock mega drop feature last year, and then this year we rock alpha, and we will continue to experiment to see what else can we improve in terms of the suite of features that we have and how we can serve users with different needs much better.
How has the growth of this product been of Binance Alpha and user feedback so far?
Well, as you can see, if you look at the different data coming through, very, very robust in terms of demand. There's great user interest. There's great interaction and engagement on Binance Alpha. I think the best form of flattery is when people are starting to copy what we have and trying to draw equivalent on their platform, right? But we are quite confident of what we have built as a product feature. And I think based on feedback that our users give us, they really like it. They really feel engaged. So we're very happy with the traction that we've gained on that front.
Cool. So just moving on, Richard, to more broader, the crypto exchange space as is right now. And obviously, as an exchange CEO, you have access to some data and insights that many of us would dream of. So from your dashboard there internally at Binance, I'm curious, does crypto user growth still trace bull or bear markets? Obviously, you've mentioned the growth that you've had over the past from 170 to 250 over the past year, million over the past year. So I'm curious, obviously that was at a time when we've had this bull market. Do you think it still follows bull and bear markets, or do you think that the growth is kind of smoothing out to a long-term average?
First of all, just an observation, right? So unlike any other asset class in the world, whether it's commodities, FX, stocks and bonds, they are normally just embraced by institutions, and then they go down to corporate treasuries, high net worth individual, and then finally retail get access to them. Crypto is the only asset class, if you think about it, that has been embraced by retail for the longest period of time. And the rest of that value chain and value curve doesn't come on until much later, right? So I was involved in this sector in 2017, as I mentioned. None of the regulators were paying attention to this space. The institution thing is a passing fad, it won't stay. None of them are really devoting any resources on this. But this has changed very drastically in 2024. First, with the introduction of the ETF in the US and then approval in many other parts of the world, the changing position of all the financial institutions, from the likes of Fidelity, Charles Schwab, BlackRock, etc. They used to be skeptics of crypto. Now they fully embrace and support crypto agenda. And it's not only them. If you look at all the top financial institutions around the world, all of them have a crypto agenda now, right? And trying to embrace crypto. So that sea change has come about. But with that, also the type of profile is slowly changing, right? So it used to be very retail. And when a product is very retail, it tends to be much smaller in terms of market capitalization. And anything that's much smaller in market capitalization tends to be very volatile because you only have sort of one category of users. But now with the onslaught of institutional users, and institutions tends to be much longer buy and hold type of users, right? So you have different mix now, from institutions to foundations to countries around the world starting to hold as crypto as a reserve, to high net worth to retail users and traders, right? So you have different mix of clientele now. So the volatility should reduce, especially now the market cap is much bigger than before. Anything that has a much larger market cap tends to be less volatile. So when we go through the cycle of the past, all asset class will go through cycles. All asset class will have retreats from their high. So those market cycles will come regardless of what asset class. But given the better mix of clientele, I think the volatility element will be quite different compared to before.
Got it. And just going back to this clientele mix and the point you mentioned about the institutional adoption of crypto and the institutional clients and your growth you've seen over the past year. And I don't know if it's public information as opposed to what we've seen, for example, on the likes of Coinbase, et cetera, when they've published their financials. I'm curious, how much in percentage terms of your trading volume is institutional based versus retail?
We don't publish those.
You don't publish it.
As you know, we have different. I mean, for people that trade on Binance, they will know that there are different type of what we call VIP tiers, right? So depending on how much you trade, how much you hold assets on the platform, etc., you are tiered accordingly. But what we aim to do as a platform is to understand the needs of every type of clientele, right? So retail clientele in different regions, they have different needs, and we want to serve them to the best of our ability. The slightly higher tier VIPs will again have different needs. The family office has different needs, and people, there are institutions, etc. The big traders have different needs. So the needs of all these clientele are slightly different, and you'll be quite surprised, even if they are the same type of clientele, for example, institutions. If they're coming from different regions, again, their needs are slightly different. So what we aim to do is to make sure that we have a dedicated team to really understand those needs much better, and we can serve our clients much better to have product feature that cater to their needs.
Got it. Yeah, I mean, I'm just curious because coming back to this question, and I'm asking it just to get an understanding of user growth in general, because you mentioned obviously the institutional adoption we've seen over the past year more specifically. So would you say then it's fair to say that a lot of the growth in terms of Binance's volume and trading volume and has been on the institutional side, or is it still retail focused, just specifically over the past year?
I think it's a good mix.
Good mix. Okay.
Last year, we have seen a lot of institutional interest, right? But by and large, I would say it's a good mix. We have seen an uptick of interest, both institutions as well as retail.
Got it. So coming back to retail traders now more specifically, and this is impacting on the crypto exchange space quite a lot. And I'm curious to understand what you think will potentially slow the growth over the next 12 months. And now, for example, we've seen a lot of growth happening on decentralized exchanges. So do you think, at least on the retail side of it, DEXs could ever be a big threat to SEXs?
Well, my view is that both will continue to grow, right? So on the centralized exchange part, there are certain advantages that we offer that decentralized exchange can't offer, right? For example, to regulators especially, we do KYC, KYB, money laundering provisions that we provide, security, which is a big concern for users, right? If something goes wrong with the accounts, there's somebody to attend to them, to call, to address their concerns. Binance come out with a SAFU fund of more than 1 billion to make sure that, we have invested greatly in security, multi-level encryption in terms of data, in terms of real-time monitoring, multi-layer security features, both on the platform side, but we also urge our users to make sure that their devices are properly secure. And we spend a lot of time educating our users on that front. And we continue to push ahead with many of the product features. So there are certain advantages that we offer. And decentralized exchange will continue to grow. There is a growing debate within the regulatory circle of whether decentralized exchange are being used for money laundering purposes. And I think a fair bit of scrutiny has started by, I understand, some of the regulators around the world on that front. So rules and regulations will be imposed on them as well, I think, over time. And so that regulatory arbitrage should minimize. But I believe firmly that both will continue to grow, and we offer certain advantages to users that decentralized can't offer.
Got it. Just on this decentralized exchange point, from the user perspective and from what we've seen over the past 2 months more specifically, one of the biggest driving forces I've seen for their use is that, like you mentioned, they're non-KYC. And from what we've seen, for example, in the recent Coinbase data leak, is that there are concerns around sensitive documents being leaked. And it's a big one for retail users. So my question is, how do you square the circle between requirements for KYC and AML, which you are intimately familiar with the concerns from users about the increasing KYC industrial complex we've seen?
Well, I think if you look at it, we operate firstly in the financial arena. We can't run away from KYC, KYB as a responsible financial institution. And I think the bulk of the users globally does not fall into the category that has anything to hide. And in the crypto world, as you know, illicit crime can be traced anywhere. It's a traceable technology. People that think that it cannot be traced are too naive and probably don't know the technology well enough. We work with many law enforcement agencies around the world. There's approach us and approach other platforms as well for information to facilitate their investigation on that front. So, if they want to engage in illicit activities in sort of platforms that are non-KYC, non-KYB, there are risks involved as well, right? So they just have to be quite mindful of all those things. The law enforcement agencies are looking. So I think there are certain aspects that people should just be careful about. It's a traceable technology.
100%. My point is just around, I think what we've seen is this pushback against KYC because of people's concerns around, how safe is this KYC information?
Yeah. So data is sacrosanct, right? So we agree. So which is why we are very, very careful in terms of data protection of users, making sure that there are multi-layer protection on that front. And to us, that is something that, we always are very concerned with, to make sure that our user data are always keenly protected. When I say that we cooperate with law enforcement agencies, it's only for legitimate requests, right? With strong case where, there's proof of illicit activities or crime taking place. And we want to help to bring some of those wrongdoers to task. For example, people involved in kidnapping within the crypto scene, as you can see. We can help to pinpoint where those people are, for instance. So we will continue to help to keep it a much safer environment for all. And I think our vested interests are all aligned on that front.
Okay, good. So now I'll just take a step back, and I want to get your view more on the broader markets right now. So it's clear that things have fundamentally changed from previous cycles. So as you mentioned, corporate balance sheets, institutions, nation state adoption. So what were some of the biggest developments over the past year that you think, some of the biggest developments you guys have noticed in the space, or news events that have basically really changed the crypto landscape?
I mentioned a few just now. I think
Yeah.
firstly, with the approval of ETF in the US
Yeah.
and then subsequently around the world, I think that changed perception. That gave crypto the needed recognition that it always deserved. That is a mainstream asset class, is a macro asset that people should own in their portfolio. And I think that narrative is increasingly coming true. And a lot of crypto utility, including the usage of stablecoin in terms of crypto payments, are coming true in a big fashion as well, whether it's PayFi or the usage of stablecoin. It's not only retail users understanding the beauty of it. I think many corporate treasuries, many corporates and firms are now appreciating it and want to embrace it. And you can see the increasing use of stablecoins around the world on that front. Crypto has been used on other places, right? So you look at RWA, real asset tokenization, that's coming true. Again, there's so much inefficiency in the traditional financial space. If you think about it, you trade stocks. A lot of stock exchanges are still operating on T+2, T+3. Clearing and settlement is 3 days later, right? When you're trading it today. It shouldn't be like that. I mean, given that you have all the technology now in the world, you have blockchain and AI, why isn't it instantaneous settlement? So that you can eliminate clearing risk, right? Blockchain technologies allow you to do all those things, right? So if you reimagine the future world, you'll not be what you see today, right? Remittance take 2 to 3 days going through one or two correspondent bank. Again, these are very archaic infrastructure. If you rethink the world, the future world could look quite different, right? Again, I mean, if you look at it, financial institutions for the longer time was anti-crypto because it could be disruptive to what the business model of financial institutions are. So if you imagine the future world, today many people own bank account. In future, that can be replaced by a wallet. So from your wallet, you can receive payment for your employment in terms of stable coins. You can do asset allocation across multi-asset classes. If you want to hold stable coins for you, there's one. You can hold real asset, etc., etc. So if you reimagine the future, blockchain can solve many of the problems that the current financial infrastructure, which is pretty archaic, costs. Right. So it's pretty exciting in that space, which is why, especially if you look at young adults, people in their 20s and 30s, once they discover the beauty of crypto, many of them won't move back, right? So if you look at the first investment among many young adults, it's not into securities and bonds, it's into crypto. People in their early 30s, 70% of their asset, and this is based on global data, are into crypto. It's not into traditional assets, right? So, and any industry where the youth are embracing is the industry for growth for the future, which is why this industry is growing at such a rapid pace.
Yeah, just going back to, you mentioned RWAs as an exciting sector you guys are looking at. We've obviously seen RWAs, the biggest growth in RWAs on the tokenized treasury front, but now a lot of companies and exchanges and brokers are experimenting with tokenized stocks. So I'm curious, is that something as in Binance's roadmap at all? Are you exploring that sector? Is it something you're thinking about?
We're always in discussion with potential partners on what else can we explore, right? So, but if you look at it, you're absolutely right. If you think about why tokenized treasury makes sense, right? So if you place money with a bank, for people that are much more familiar with the banking space, you get, very meager interest rate. But if you place the same amount of money via tokenized treasury, immediately that yield has improved substantially. So there's a problem that is solved, right? And the value can be unlocked immediately, right? So for many of the other asset classes, that value unlock may not be so clear. But what it makes sense, especially for financial institutions to do, is how do you improve your middle and back office functions? Today, the financial institutions have thousands of people in middle and back office functions doing reconciliation because they are not blockchain, right? But if you put all your assets on blockchain via RWA, you eliminate all those middle and back office function. You eliminate the need for reconciliation. Everything is immutable. You have proper records, etc. So you can reach a different dimension in terms of your setup quite quickly, and it results in substantial cost savings, right? So at least from a cost saving angle, it makes sense for financial institutions to do it. Whether it can result in value unlock in the sense that many people are pushing forward, the verdict is still out there. So let's wait and see. But there are some clear areas where we can see value unlock, which include treasuries. Other areas not so clear. But we will continue to work with potential partners that always come to us and approach us to have a very meaningful and useful conversation on how we can be useful partners in many of these different areas.
Yeah. And tokenized stocks, like I mentioned, I think from the retail perspective, do you think there are still questions around securities laws as it relates to tokenized in stocks that makes it a bit more difficult to
Definitely.
issue?
So tokenization is just a technological advancement. It doesn't change the characteristics of the underlying product, right? So if it's a commodity, you tokenize the commodity. It's still a commodity. It's still subject to commodities rules and regulations. Same for securities. So tokenizing something doesn't change the law surrounding that. So we just have to be mindful of the rules and regulations that will apply to some of those product classes as well.
Okay. And I'll come back to another thing that's really in vogue now, specifically on the Bitcoin front that we've seen a lot of, and is the corporate accumulation on balance sheets. You've obviously worked with nation states, you advise in some nations, and also, of course, you've got a large institutional client base. But have any corporates reached out to you to discuss them potentially looking at some sort of a corporate balance sheet allocation to Bitcoin?
Definitely. So, anybody that's involved in crypto knows that Binance operates the deepest liquidity pool. And for many of the institutions and corporate, they're very sensitive to this, right? So having the deepest liquidity pool allow them to have the best bid-ask spread, which results in substantial cost savings when they trade over time, right? So they realize the advantage of coming onto our platform. So definitely those are coming true. We are seeing many corporates coming onto the platform. And again, going back to the earlier point that you mentioned, different clientele have different needs. We just have to understand their needs and see how we can serve them to the best of our ability. So again, the corporate treasury have different needs on that front. And we are, always out here to really support them in terms of what they need to do.
Okay. So just playing a bit of devil's advocate on this corporate accumulation point. Now, as you mentioned, as a regulator, you were previously focused, of course, on risks. So talking about risks, one thing I've been thinking about more and more, and indeed people are raising in the crypto space right now, is this debt-fueled accumulation of Bitcoin by these corporate treasuries. Does this potentially present some sort of a risk to the market? We know Bitcoin is an incredibly volatile asset, and not many of these corporates that are right now adding it to their balance sheet, maybe as diamond-handed as Sailor, for example. So I'm curious to get your take on that.
My take is this. There are many type of investors out there, right? So you have institutions, they are buy and hold. You have institutions, they are traders. You have corporates, again, they are buy and hold. And many of them are entities that have proper risk management put in place to make sure that the exposure is something that they can manage within their framework, their board of directors to report to as a corporate. In many instances, they have regulators to report to, whether it's a listed regulator or financial services regulator. So they are subject to oversight as well, be it in terms of a board of directors, proper risk control on the internal management framework, or some form of external regulators. And if the auditors are concerned, they always raise alarm bell as well, right? So there are different checks and balances, but on the broader macro scale, there are so many different type of investors, right? So, and corporate treasury is just one aspect of it. They don't represent the major aspect of crypto, right? So having very diverse pool globally of different type of investors will help crypto to continue to tide over any short-term volatility. But, again, we are still very early days. Many of the corporates have not started allocating. Many of the institutions have not started allocating. Their due diligence process will take a lot of time. Some have, but the bulk have not. So we are still very early in the game.
Got it. Okay, so in terms of just the market cycle right now, coming back to your dashboard there at Binance and access to all the information you have, I want to understand to get a close picture as to the way you think the market could be swaying. So, first question, I suppose, just like, do you think, because what we've seen more recently is Bitcoin dominance has been going up and altcoins have kind of like been underperforming. So, do you think that this Bitcoin only cycle is going to continue? And or will we get that mass rotation we've seen in many other cycles? Many people will obviously term the altcoin season. I'm just curious if you guys have a perspective on that at all.
Well, I think the thing is this, right? So again, none of the asset class will be immune to macroeconomic conditions. So we are living in a world that macroeconomic events are evolving at a very rapid pace, sometimes at a very compressed rate. Daily, things could change, right? As you could see. So we are subject to all those macroeconomic conditions and uncertainty. We are subject to interest rate environment, as you know. Bitcoin, crypto generally is considered a risk asset like many other asset class, including commodities, securities. And any risk asset will be subject to macroeconomic conditions and interest rate environment. So those will play a factor in terms of the longer term performance. But if you look at the key drivers, especially on Bitcoin, I think it's very strong. It has become an institutionalized product. Many of the other tokens have not been or are on their way. I think with more and more ETF being introduced on some of the other tokens, I think some will have great uptake among institutions, and then you will have different investors with different risk appetite and duration, and they buy and hold, some trade, etc. So you will have a much better mix of investors in some of those tokens as well over time. And hopefully the positivity in terms of Bitcoin will flow down to many of the other tokens as well, as we can see in past cycle. But it's very difficult to predict. This cycle, we have seen strong institutional uptake and interest in Bitcoin, and we have not seen such a strong institutional uptake in some of the other the altcoins on that front. But I think with more ETF being approved globally, I think that narrative will change.
Interesting. And just curious, so from your discussions then with your institutional team and these institutional clients, do you think it is that access? Because if they're using Binance, they can just buy them as per spot. So is it just the ETF component that's keeping some of these large asset allocators away from altcoins, or is there something else?
I think it's a combination of things, right? So I think for many of people, including retail investors who are novice, right, their first foray into crypto is always, Bitcoin, because it's a benchmark. It accounts for more than 50% of market capitalization. And if you get exposure, you think that, you're pretty safe, your exposure to crypto. And that's what institutions would think. Institutions come to us because unlike ETF that only trades a certain number of hours a day, Monday to Fridays, holidays, they are not trading. There's huge liquidity costs associated with a non-24/7 platform. Information flow throughout the day doesn't stop. Crypto is 24/7. So you can't take position, you can't hedge your position if you are long, or you can't take short positions, etc. on those platforms. Whereas on the largest platform in the world, with the deepest liquidity, you can continue to manage your risk in a very meaningful and continuous fashion, and you can take new positions if you want to. So we have seen a lot of institutional interest on that front because of that. But the first foray for crypto novice normally is into Bitcoin, right? And as they learn more, then they started to go down and do deep dive into other areas. But so it's a journey, it's a process. But the beginning of that journey for many of us, including myself, is always Bitcoin.
So they're yet to disappear down that crypto rabbit hole and discover the magical world of altcoins.
Yeah, that's absolutely.
Cool. So just to finish off, Richard, just a few quick questions for you personally. I mean, you went from a regulator to an exchange chief. So I'm curious, what habits from your MAS and ADGM days help you most in the hot seat right now running the world's largest exchange?
Well, I think a few things, right, on that front. I always believe in talent. If you have the best team in play, the most driven, most committed team, I think is half the battle won. And so I'm very privileged to always have been working with very excellent, very committed and driven team. Binance being the global leader in this space, we are very privileged. I mean, we have a very strong strength of senior leadership, but we are very committed people at different levels working for us. So I'm very deeply thankful and grateful to our very passionate group of people, Binanceans, and our very passionate users working with us to make this the best platform out there. Secondly, always try to ask the question for me, how can I be service to you? And that's not only to our external users, our clients. How can I be service to you? Meaning, how can I make things much better for you? But also to our internal staff. How can I be of service to you so that I give you all the necessary tools, techniques, processes, resources for you to excel in your job? Because it's only when you excel in the job that the company will continue to excel, right? So how can I be service to you to make sure that we make you much better on the different areas? So I think some of those things works very well for me, and always be curious to learn new things. I'm not the sort of regulator that just regulate. Again, when I got involved in crypto in 2017, I tell all my regulators working for me, if you really want to know about crypto, you jolly well invest in it. Because how can you regulate banks and know how banks operate if you don't have a bank account? You're not credible, right?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, most of them have not invested until today in crypto. So I did. I opened 2 trading accounts with 2 crypto exchanges and start dabbling. And the more I discovered, the more I know how those things are working. How do you create your wallets? How do you do transfer? What does the blockchain technology represent? The more knowledgeable, the better I am to help regulate this industry. So always be curious. There are always new things to learn, and in our industry, things evolve on a daily basis. There are so many things evolving. So it's a good and exciting industry. So I encourage people to continue learning. We have a good Binance Academy that you can go to if you want to learn anything about crypto on that front. It's a free-to-air platform. So we have educated millions of people on that platform. So be always curious to learn new things.
Yeah. I hope when you first moved, when you were a regulator and you opened your first 2 exchange accounts, was that on Binance? Well, hopefully it was Binance.
Definitely. Right.
Yeah.
So again, why did I open 2? Because I want to understand the different experience.
Yeah.
As you know, different platforms offer you different experience. So you want to make sure that you go to the best one. And over time, naturally, people will gravitate to us, and we are very thankful for all the people support.
Yeah. Well, thanks a lot, Richard. This has been a great discussion. It's really exciting to see what you guys are working on and how you are thinking about going the year to come. So hopefully hope to have you on again in the next few months to get updates on some of these goals. And thanks again for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Nick.
Come on. Cheers, guys.